After my husband died, my son demanded his inheritance early. I had to show him the documents he never saw. The humid August air in Houston made the funeral parlor feel suffocating as I sat in the front row, watching my husband Marcus's casket being lowered into the ground at Forest Park Lawndale Cemetery. 35 years of marriage had ended with a sudden heart attack that took him at only 62, leaving me not just grieving the loss of my life partner, but facing an unexpected battle with our 28-year-old son Kevin, who had barely waited for the dirt to settle before demanding to know about his inheritance from his father's police pension and life insurance. The tension had started during the wake when Kevin pulled me aside between condolences from Marcus's former colleagues from the Houston Police Department, where he had served for 30 years before retiring as a sergeant. Kevin's voice was cold and calculating as he asked pointed questions about life insurance policies, retirement benefits, and property deeds, showing more interest in financial documents than in mourning his father or supporting me through the most difficult period of my life. If this story is touching your heart, please comment below where you're watching from, give this video a like, and subscribe to our channel because we truly help families going through these difficult situations. Your support helps us continue sharing these stories of overcoming adversity. What Kevin didn't realize was that 3 weeks before his death, Marcus had made some significant changes to his will and beneficiary designations after discovering some troubling information about our son's character and priorities. As a retired police officer with strong moral convictions, Marcus had been deeply disappointed by Kevin's recent behavior, particularly his treatment of his girlfriend Sarah and his mounting gambling debts that he had been hiding from us for over 2 years. During those final weeks, Marcus had confided in me about his concerns regarding Kevin's financial irresponsibility and his fear that a large inheritance would only enable more destructive behavior rather than help our son build a stable future. He had witnessed too many cases during his police career where sudden wealth had ruined young people's lives, and he was determined not to let that happen to Kevin, even if it meant making difficult decisions about the family finances. The funeral service was held at St. Matthew's Baptist Church on the south side of Houston, where Marcus and I had been active members for over 20 years. The sanctuary was packed with fellow retired officers, neighbors from our Bel Air suburb community, and family friends who had watched Kevin grow up from a promising young boy into the troubled adult he had become. The pastor's eulogy focused on Marcus's dedication to serving his community and his family, values that seemed increasingly foreign to our son. Houston's oppressive summer heat made the graveside service particularly challenging, with the temperature reaching 98 degrees and humidity levels that made everyone's formal attire feel like torture. The contrast between the solemn ceremony and Kevin's impatient fidgeting was stark and embarrassing, especially when he kept checking his phone during the prayer and seemed more focused on when the proceedings would end than on honoring his father's memory. After the burial, the traditional gathering at our family home in Bel Air became the setting for Kevin's first direct demand about his inheritance. While other mourners shared stories about Marcus's kindness and dedication, Kevin cornered me in the kitchen and bluntly asked when he could expect to receive his portion of his father's estate, including the substantial life insurance policy that Marcus had maintained throughout his police career. The life insurance policy in question was worth $450,000, accumulated through decades of consistent premium payments and supplemented by additional coverage provided by the Houston Police Department for retired officers. Kevin seemed to have calculated exactly what he believed he was entitled to, suggesting that he had been researching our family's financial situation long before his father's death, possibly even while Marcus was still alive and suffering from the heart condition that would eventually kill him. Kevin's girlfriend Sarah, whom Marcus had never particularly liked due to her materialistic tendencies and negative influence on our son's spending habits, had been encouraging Kevin to claim what was rightfully his immediately rather than waiting for the traditional probate process. She had been filling his head with ideas about investing in a startup business that required immediate capital, conveniently coinciding with Marcus's death and the availability of insurance money. The startup business was supposedly a food truck venture that Sarah had researched extensively, focusing on gourmet burgers and craft beer that would cater to the young professional crowd in downtown Houston. However, Marcus had always been skeptical of get-rich-quick schemes and had tried to teach Kevin the value of steady, honest work rather than pursuing high-risk ventures that could result in significant financial losses. During the weeks following the funeral, Kevin's visits to our family home became increasingly uncomfortable and transactional, with every conversation eventually steering toward the topic of money and inheritance timelines. He showed little interest in helping me process my grief or dealing with the emotional aspects of losing his father, instead treating our interactions like business meetings where he could pressure me for information about estate planning and beneficiary distributions. The family home where Marcus and I had lived for 18 years held countless memories of better times, when Kevin had been a loving son who respected his parents and appreciated the sacrifices we had made for his education and opportunities. Now the same living room where we had celebrated birthdays and holidays felt like a battleground where Kevin was fighting for money while I was still struggling to accept that my husband was gone forever. Marcus had been particularly proud of the modest but well-maintained home we had purchased in Bel Air, a middle-class suburb known for its strong community values and excellent schools. He had spent countless weekends working on home improvements, building a back deck where we hosted barbecues for neighbors and fellow police families, creating memories that Kevin seemed to have forgotten in his rush to monetize his father's death. The contrast between Kevin's current behavior and the young man we had raised was heartbreaking and confusing. During his teenage years, he had expressed interest in following in his father's footsteps, possibly pursuing a career in law enforcement or public service. Those dreams had been abandoned during college when he became involved with a party crowd that introduced him to gambling and expensive lifestyle habits that his part-time job at a sporting goods store could never support. Kevin's gambling problem had started small with occasional poker games and sports betting, but had escalated significantly during his junior year of college when he discovered online gambling platforms that made it easy to lose large sums of money from his apartment. Marcus had discovered the extent of the problem when Kevin's credit card debt reached dangerous levels, and he had come to us begging for help, promising to change his behavior if we bailed him out one final time. The bailout had cost us $12,000, money that Marcus had planned to use for home renovations and a long-awaited vacation to commemorate his retirement from the police force. Instead of enjoying the fruits of his 30-year career, Marcus had spent his final years worrying about Kevin's financial stability and character development, wondering where he and I had gone wrong in raising our son. 3 months after the funeral, Kevin's impatience reached a breaking point when he threatened to hire a lawyer to contest the will if I didn't immediately provide him with copies of all estate documents and insurance policies. His threat came during a particularly heated argument in our kitchen, where he accused me of hiding money that rightfully belonged to him and suggested that I was being manipulated by grief into making poor financial decisions. The accusation was particularly painful because I had been Marcus's partner in every major financial decision throughout our marriage, and I understood our family's financial situation better than Kevin realized. Marcus had always been meticulous about record-keeping and had ensured that I was fully informed about all investments, insurance policies, and retirement benefits so that I could handle everything appropriately after his death. Kevin's threat to involve lawyers forced me to make a decision that Marcus and I had hoped would never be necessary. I retrieved the manila envelope that Marcus had given me 6 weeks before his death, containing documents that revealed the full extent of Kevin's gambling debts, his deception about his financial situation, and most importantly, the private investigator's report that Marcus had commissioned to understand exactly how our son was spending his money. The private investigator's report painted a disturbing picture of Kevin's secret life, documenting regular visits to underground poker games in Houston's Warehouse District, substantial cash withdrawals that coincided with major sporting events, and financial transactions that suggested he owed money to people who were not legitimate creditors. Marcus had hired the investigator after noticing suspicious changes in Kevin's behavior and discovering that several $1,000s had been mysteriously charged to Kevin's credit card in a single weekend. The most shocking revelation in the investigator's report was that Kevin had been systematically lying to us about his employment status and income. While he claimed to be working full-time at the sporting goods store, the report showed that he had been fired 6 months earlier for stealing merchandise to sell for gambling money. He had been maintaining the illusion of employment while actually supporting himself through small-time gambling wins and increasingly desperate borrowing from questionable sources. Marcus had also discovered that Kevin had forged our signatures on a loan application, using our home as collateral without our knowledge or consent to secure $15,000 that he had immediately lost in a single night of poker. The forgery constituted fraud that could have resulted in criminal charges, but Marcus had quietly handled the situation by paying off the loan and ensuring that the paperwork was corrected to protect our home and credit rating. The paperwork Marcus had prepared included a detailed timeline of Kevin's deceptions, copies of forged documents, photographs from the private investigator showing Kevin at various gambling establishments, and financial records proving that he had stolen money from our joint checking account on multiple occasions. The evidence was comprehensive and undeniable, building a case that Kevin had violated our trust repeatedly and systematically over a period of nearly 3 years. Most devastating of all was Marcus's handwritten letter explaining his decision to restructure his will and life insurance beneficiaries. The letter detailed his love for Kevin despite everything, but also his conviction that providing immediate access to a large sum of money would enable more destructive behavior rather than encouraging positive change. Marcus had consulted with a family therapist and a financial advisor before making his final decisions about the estate. The revised will stipulated that Kevin would receive his inheritance only after completing a court-supervised rehabilitation program for gambling addiction and maintaining steady employment for a minimum of 2 years. The life insurance money would be held in trust, with monthly payments available for legitimate expenses like housing, education, or business investments that were approved by a trustee who understood addiction recovery. When I showed Kevin the documents, his reaction was explosive and revealing. Instead of expressing remorse for his behavior or acknowledging the pain he had caused his father, he immediately began calculating ways to circumvent the trust requirements and access the money more quickly. His first question was whether he could contest the will in court, and his second was whether there were loopholes in the trust language that a lawyer might be able to exploit. The conversation lasted for 3 hours, during which Kevin alternated between anger, denial, and desperate bargaining. He accused Marcus of being controlling and vindictive, claiming that the gambling problem was under control, and that he deserved a chance to prove himself with immediate access to his inheritance. He threatened to cut off all contact with me if I didn't find a way to override Marcus's wishes and give him the money he believed he was owed. Sarah's reaction to the news was equally predictable and disappointing. When Kevin called her from our living room to explain the situation, I could hear her screaming through the phone about unfair treatment and demanding that Kevin fight the will regardless of the evidence against him. She had clearly been counting on the inheritance money for her business venture and was unwilling to accept that her plans would need to be postponed or abandoned entirely. The trust arrangement that Marcus had established was actually quite generous and thoughtful, designed to provide Kevin with substantial financial support while protecting him from his own worst impulses. The monthly payments would be sufficient to cover a modest apartment, reliable transportation, and living expenses while he worked on rebuilding his life and career. The full inheritance would become available when he turned 35, assuming he had maintained stable employment and completed the required counseling programs. Kevin's inability to appreciate the wisdom and love behind his father's final decisions was perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of the entire situation. Marcus had spent his last months crafting a plan that would force Kevin to address his problems while still ensuring that he would eventually receive substantial financial support. The restrictions were meant to be therapeutic rather than punitive, designed by a father who understood addiction and wanted to save his son from destroying his own future. The legal consultation that Kevin insisted on pursuing confirmed everything that Marcus and his attorney had anticipated. The will was ironclad, the trust was properly established, and the evidence supporting Marcus's decisions was overwhelming. Kevin's lawyer advised him that contesting the will would be expensive, time-consuming, and almost certainly unsuccessful, while also creating a permanent record of family dysfunction that could affect his professional reputation. 6 months after Marcus's death, Kevin finally agreed to enter the gambling addiction program required by the trust. The decision came after he was arrested for writing bad checks to cover gambling debts, facing criminal charges that could have resulted in jail time and permanently damaged his employment prospects. The arrest was a wake-up call that forced him to confront the reality of his situation and the consequences of his choices. The rehabilitation program was intensive and comprehensive, including individual counseling, group therapy, financial management training, and job placement services. Kevin moved into a halfway house in Northwest Houston, where he shared space with other men recovering from various addictions and learned valuable life skills that he had never developed during his years of deception and self-destruction. During the 18 months of Kevin's treatment, our relationship slowly began to heal. The mandatory family counseling sessions provided a safe space for Kevin to acknowledge the pain he had caused and for me to express my disappointment and grief over losing both my husband and the son I thought I knew. The therapist helped us understand how addiction had distorted Kevin's thinking and behavior while also holding him accountable for his choices. Kevin's transformation during treatment was gradual but genuine. He began working part-time at a warehouse job, attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings regularly, and slowly rebuilding his self-respect through honest work and authentic relationships with his fellow residents. For the first time in years, he seemed to be developing genuine friendships based on mutual support rather than financial transactions or enabling behaviors. Sarah ended their relationship during the early months of Kevin's treatment, unable to accept that the quick wealth she had been counting on was no longer available. Her departure was initially devastating for Kevin, but eventually proved to be another necessary step in his recovery process. The therapist helped him recognize that their relationship had been built on financial expectations and manipulation rather than genuine love and compatibility. 2 years after Marcus's death, Kevin successfully completed his treatment program and found steady employment as a warehouse supervisor with a logistics company that specialized in food distribution throughout the Houston area. His supervisor, a former police officer who had known Marcus, provided the kind of mentorship and accountability that helped Kevin maintain his progress while building new skills and confidence. The monthly trust payments allowed Kevin to rent a modest apartment in a safe neighborhood and purchase a reliable used car that he could afford to maintain on his supervisor's salary. For the first time since college, he was living within his means and making financial decisions based on actual income rather than anticipated gambling wins or borrowed money from family members. Kevin's relationship with money became fundamentally healthier as he learned to appreciate the security that came from steady work and careful budgeting. The trust payments supplemented his earnings without making him dependent, and he began saving money for the first time in his adult life. He even started contributing to a retirement account, understanding that his father's pension and insurance money would not last forever without careful management. 3 years after Marcus's death, Kevin met Jennifer, a nurse at the hospital where he had received treatment for a work-related injury. Their relationship developed slowly and naturally, built on shared values of honesty, hard work, and personal responsibility. Jennifer had experience working with addiction recovery patients and understood both Kevin's progress and the ongoing vigilance required to maintain his sobriety. The contrast between Jennifer and Sarah was striking and encouraging. Jennifer was impressed by Kevin's honesty about his past mistakes and his commitment to continuing his recovery work, while Sarah had been primarily interested in the financial benefits she expected from their relationship. Jennifer supported Kevin's decision to continue attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings and encouraged his goal of eventually working with other people struggling with addiction. When Kevin and Jennifer announced their engagement, they asked me to help plan a modest wedding ceremony that would focus on their commitment to each other rather than expensive displays of wealth. The wedding was held in the backyard of our Bel Air home, with decorations that Kevin and Jennifer had made themselves and catering provided by Jennifer's extended family, who owned a small restaurant in Houston's East End. During his wedding reception speech, Kevin publicly acknowledged the pain he had caused our family and expressed gratitude for Marcus's wisdom in structuring the inheritance to force him into recovery. He spoke about learning to appreciate the difference between earning something and feeling entitled to it, and about understanding that his father's final decisions had been motivated by love rather than punishment. The wedding guests included Kevin's sponsor from Gamblers Anonymous, several friends from his treatment program, and Marcus's former police colleagues who had watched Kevin grow up and were proud to see him rebuilding his life. The ceremony felt like a celebration of redemption and growth, honoring Marcus's memory while acknowledging the hard work that Kevin had done to become worthy of his father's trust. Jennifer's influence on Kevin continued to be positive and stabilizing. She encouraged him to pursue additional education and training that would improve his career prospects, and she supported his interest in eventually becoming a certified addiction counselor who could help other families dealing with similar struggles. Her nursing background gave her valuable perspective on the medical aspects of addiction and recovery. 4 years after Marcus's death, Kevin received his first substantial payment from the trust when he turned 32, having met all the requirements for demonstrating financial responsibility and maintaining his recovery. Instead of spending the money impulsively, he invested it in completing his college degree and obtaining certification as an addiction counselor, preparing for a career that would honor his father's memory while helping other families avoid the pain they had experienced. Kevin's decision to become an addiction counselor felt like the completion of a circle that had begun with Marcus's career in law enforcement. Both father and son would be dedicating their lives to helping people overcome destructive behaviors and rebuild their relationships with their families and communities. The similarities in their chosen professions created a connection that transcended Marcus's physical absence and continued his legacy of service. When Kevin and Jennifer's first child was born, they named him Marcus in honor of his grandfather. Holding my grandson for the first time, I felt Marcus's presence more strongly than I had since his death, knowing that his wisdom and love had ultimately saved our family despite the pain and conflict we had endured. Kevin had become the man his father had always hoped he could be, and the inheritance structure had played a crucial role in that transformation. The baby's nursery was decorated with photos of Marcus in his police uniform, along with pictures from Kevin's graduation from the addiction counseling program and his wedding to Jennifer. The room represented the family's journey from grief and dysfunction to healing and hope, showing how love and accountability could work together to create positive change even in the most difficult circumstances. Kevin's work as an addiction counselor brought him into contact with many families dealing with gambling addiction, and he often shared our story as an example of how proper intervention and support could lead to recovery. He emphasized the importance of consequences and accountability, while also demonstrating that change was possible with commitment and professional help. His personal experience gave his professional work authenticity and effectiveness that inspired both clients and colleagues. 5 years after Marcus's death, our family had been transformed in ways that none of us could have anticipated during those dark days following the funeral. Kevin had become a respected professional who was making a meaningful contribution to his community, and our relationship had evolved into a mature partnership based on mutual respect and shared values. The inheritance that had initially driven us apart had ultimately brought us together in a deeper and more meaningful way. Today, Kevin manages his portion of Marcus's estate with the same careful attention and moral consideration that his father would have appreciated. He has established a scholarship fund for young people from single-parent families who want to pursue careers in public service, and he regularly speaks at police department events about the importance of addressing addiction issues in law enforcement families. Marcus's legacy lives on through Kevin's work and his commitment to helping others overcome the challenges that once nearly destroyed our family. The documents that revealed Kevin's gambling addiction and led to the restructured inheritance had seemed like instruments of punishment when I first showed them to him, but they had actually been tools of salvation that forced him to confront his problems and rebuild his life on a foundation of honesty and personal responsibility. Marcus's final act as a father had been to save his son from himself, demonstrating that sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior, even when it causes temporary pain and conflict. Looking back on those difficult years, I understand that Marcus's decision to restrict Kevin's inheritance was not about money but about character, not about punishment but about redemption, not about controlling our son but about freeing him from the addiction that was destroying his future. The wisdom and courage Marcus showed in his final months continued to guide our family long after his death, proving that a father's love can transcend death when it is expressed through thoughtful planning and difficult decisions made for the right reasons.